Welcome to another episode of the 1 Year No Beer podcast. Today I am your host, Rory Fairbairns, and I am so excited for today's guest. Today I have the pleasure of having Dr. Rajita Sinha on our podcast. Dr. Rajita is a prominent figure at Yale University School of Medicine. She's an expert in psychiatry, neuroscience, and child study, renowned for her work at the Yale Interdisciplinary Stress Center. Easy for you to say if you haven't had a couple of drinks. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Her research focuses on the neurobiology and psychology of stress, trauma, and coping mechanisms related to neuropsychiatric diseases. She's known for innovative paradigms to understand stress, pain, and addiction mechanisms, and her work, supported by NIH funding, has a significant impact on addiction and stress research. So, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Rajita Sinha. Rajita, can I call you that from going forward, or shall I call you Dr. Sinha?
No, please call me Rajita. Hi, Rory. Very nice to be with you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on. I've been getting so buried deep into your past piece of research and the wonderful work that you've been doing. And as I was going through this stuff, I was like, yes, we're on the right path. Yes, we're doing the right stuff. Yes, I have to get Rajita on the podcast. So I'm so glad we're going the right direction. Let's just perhaps tell the audience just a little bit about you, Rajita. You know, why did you get into this specific field and a bit of background into you?
Yeah, thank you. So I have been, as you said, you've introduced me. I've been at Yale for over 3 decades. So really grew up here, but because...
Have you grown up?
Have I grown up yet? Well, you hope so, right?
I'm still working on that one.
Right. My professional career has really grown here. I'll qualify that. And, it's been a great home for doing the work we've been doing. And my own background is I'm an Indian immigrant, Asian Indian immigrant. I came to the U.S. For graduate school, and did my graduate work in deep Midwest in Oklahoma University Health Sciences Center, so in Oklahoma City, and then came to New Haven. And as I said, I've been here for a long time. And I really got into this because of back in the day when I was very, very young, finishing my undergraduate. There was a lot of trauma and psychiatric illnesses around me in New Delhi, but there was very little help around there, and there was a lot of stress. People, interpersonal stress, emotional stress, and what I found is that we were not talking. This is early '80s. We were not talking about the brain and behavior. I got obsessed with behavior. I was like, well, where does this come from? It's not coming from outside in the ether. Where does it come from? How does this even work? And so that really guided my graduate work. I have to say that prior to that, I was trained as a classical Indian dancer.
Oh, wow.
Yep. The discipline, the type of dance called Bharatanatyam. Your Indian viewers would know about it, and also non-Indian, I think. And that is it's very important because it's actually shaped my interests and my research. Right from the start, it was an integrated body, mind, muscle sort of discipline.
Yeah.
And I got trained in that as a child and through my adolescent years. And emotions play a very big role in Indian classical dance and music. And so emotions in the body and in the mind and in the brain was really an integrated phenomenon that for me, there was no other way to really look at a person, a whole person. And Western medicine has sort of divided these things up. And one of the reasons is to do science in a very sort of technical and process and systematic way. And I get that, and I got trained that way. But it really is time for us to think about ways where we integrate the whole person and approach individuals that way, because in fact, chronic diseases that are stress-related and emotion-related and chronic health conditions, including alcohol use and misuse, are very much within the mold of needing for us to have a new framework with looking at the whole person. So that has been also a guiding post of my work and tied to where I come from.
You wouldn't have put those things together, but I love that. And that background thinking, I guess, has been a part of your journey, is really thinking, well, I had that experience younger, and I know I had to express those emotions and all of those things, which, I find it fascinating in a way that we're only kind of getting onto this stuff now, and yet we've been, I don't know whether we got sidetracked by science or we got misinformed or ill-informed, I don't know, but we seem to have gone away from being more understanding holistically, and then coming right back into this holistical movement. So yeah, talking about where you then went into, so what made you actually get into studying some of this stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I got into working on the effects of drugs and alcohol early, very early. I came to grad school and joined the Center for Drug and Alcohol Studies. And the reason was actually, as I said, I was interested in brain behavior relationships. And one very natural way of thinking about what is the connection between brain and behavior and body is the effect of drugs and alcohol. So we could study what one drink or 3 drinks or 5 drinks does to one's body and mind and brain, and then what it does over time. And that starts to give us a sense of, well, what are these emotion circuits and pain circuits and sleep circuits and autonomic arousal or heartbeat increasing faster is one way of thinking about it. Where does that come from? How does it drive emotions and behavior? So right away, it got me in that integrated space of different areas, whether it was brain, whether it was body. And alcohol and drugs really are a way for us to use that sort of almost as a model to understand better how these chemicals have their effects. And by that, we then learn about what are the circuits in the brain that get affected by. So it was a natural way by which I got into alcohol research and its effects. And then, of course, the biggest driver was how can we treat and prevent the deleterious effects of alcohol misuse or harm, alcohol-related harm.
So normally there's some kind of story where somebody has had a more intimate relationship with alcohol, and that they've gone, or they've had a family member or something like that.
Yeah.
Was there a part of any of that in your story? Were you at university? Are you a drinker? Or were you a drinker back then? Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because actually in my family, I come, from a military family, family of origin, and alcohol was very, accepted, and you drink, as folks know. The notion of drinking to forget your woes and to relax was a very accepted way. And in fact, I didn't give it much thought as a child because it was positively framed, as in so many families. Yeah. And so I do think there was misuse in my family, and there was emotional fallout from that, which I have come to understand later, and frankly, emotional trauma as a function of that for the family as well. Again, very common, and often not something that we think about, that this could be related to drinking. I grew up thinking it was not related to alcohol intake. It was people just reacting and being impulsive and not understanding somebody else's point of view. So it was interesting to me that without awareness, in some ways, I got pulled towards the work of understanding its effects more.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, that's that passion story that makes you go that little bit extra mile and want to do something that has a greater impact. And so, yeah, tell us a bit about some of that research that you've done and some of the insights. This is a 30-year journey, and I think, well, we can talk about that a bit further down the track, but I imagine a lot has changed in 30 years from all of those studies and research.
Yes, a lot has changed. When I started off, it was very hard for people to think that alcohol effects are directly impacting people's function and structure of the brain. It was sort of like a social community. You drink because you want to hang out. And yes, some people have problems, but you have to give it up. There was a very strong, at least in the U.S., an AA movement, which is very helpful and important. But it was very much about counselors and other people, non-medical folks, sort of taking on the problems and handling it in the social context. And that's a very important constituency, important group of folks that have helped keeping the focus on alcohol misuse and alcohol use disorder and its effects. But we really needed to bring it. So in the last 30 years, the journey has been, I've been part of the journey of really, understanding its effects better, the science behind it, and developing new treatment. When I started, there was one medication for the treatment of alcohol use disorder, and it was antabuse. Of course, we still have antabuse. And that had, I think, I don't even remember now when we got antabuse, but it had been a good 20, 30 years. And then in the 90s, there was work done here at Yale that contributed to the approval of naltrexone, which is now Vivitrol, and there have been a couple of different ways in which naltrexone is prescribed for alcohol use disorder. And I say that because we need medications, we need behavioral therapy, we need support, we need social challenges, as you've done, to really meet people where they are. And that is the other aspect of the journey that I've had, is to learn that. In my own clinical work, I ran the what we call here the substance addiction treatment unit, which is one of the largest publicly funded outpatient addiction programs in the greater New Haven area. And I learned so much from people who were struggling with alcohol misuse and different levels of addiction severity, but also less severe in terms of what are their challenges? What is it that happens to them? And that learning, that feedback from folks, talking to them just as you're talking, shaped my research. I brought, I remember running a group, a cognitive behavioral group, and folks would say, what you're telling me to do to avoid alcohol, I could teach it back to you. And frankly, they could teach me back.
Yeah.
And they said, but I don't know what happened to me. I was like, well, what happened then? How come you relapsed? What happened? Tell me, how come you went back to the bar? And we brought that back into the laboratory. We said, you know what? We're going to bring this back into the laboratory and try to understand what happened to you. And humans have this amazing ability to re-experience. There's a good and bad to re-experience. We imagine things. We imagine scenarios. We remember past scenarios. So we used an experimental model of having them remembering, going back to those moments that put them at risk or returning to just that one drink, and began to understand what happens to their bodies and brains in that way. And one of the things we learned, Rory, was that the stress system was very tied to it. And we came upon this and then went back to the literature, the animal models, but also in humans. Well, alcohol is a stimulant of the stress response. What do I mean by that? I basically mean that alcohol will stimulate your heart rate. Your heart rate goes up, right? It will stimulate cortisol. So cortisol increases. And that's what, it's a biphasic drug. By that, I mean it stimulates our body, and then it starts to have depressant effects. So you start to get sleepy. However, Alcohol is an amazing stimulant because it fully stimulates the stress system. And one key feature of the stress system is adapt. We adapt to the stress around us. And that's what makes humans so unique as a species. We live long because we learn. We adapt and learn to the stressors of our environment for the most part. There are resilient mechanisms. Well, imagine if there are now these outside other things that target that same system.
Which there always are.
Always are, but now we've got chemicals that are stimulating, are contributing to changing. And so that has been the journey. That is what we learned, is that these changes in heart rate, in arousal, directly contribute to, for example, sleep problem. And sleep changes happen early with alcohol. We don't talk about this, but anybody that has had a binge drinking night can tell you. Ask them about how was sleep that night for them.
Yeah.
I'm sure your viewers will. There are plenty of stories there.
Absolutely. And just going back into some of the things you said there. I think you mentioned this previously to me, that you'd started down this road of with Yale of researching alcohol and alcohol misuse, and you really came solidly upon this thing of like, well, actually, this is a response to stress. You told me this story before because you changed the name of it. Just tell me a bit more about that experience, what was going on there, and
yeah. So there were two forces really happening. The first is, like I just described, where we were looking at alcohol effects and came upon the fact that it is very intricately, really just maps right onto its effects, map onto the stress system. Yes, it makes us feel better. But again, your viewers or any of us who've drank alcohol, it's such a sneaky drug, right? You want to feel good, but very soon you're not feeling as good as that first drink. And then it's that chase that happens. And it's like, oh, I think if I get 2 or 3 down, I'm going to feel more upbeat. And by then, of course, you've put a lot more alcohol in your body. And so what we came to discover was that it has very dramatic effects on the stress arousal systems and our stress coping, our stress protective systems, which it starts to suppress. And so with the very commonly used substance like alcohol, 85% of individuals in the U.S. use. 65% of those folks will use regularly. What we realized is that we have to backtrack and really understand stress. And what is its relationship to reward, to pleasure, and to behaviors? People were talking about stress. For a long time, we've known that depression is related to stress and anxiety is related to stress, and even, rheumatoid arthritis and physiologic conditions, some cancers, heart disease. But those things happen later. The question we were really taken up with, well, what do people do when they're stressed? What happens when you're stressed? And of course, we had some findings and some secrets we had learned from our alcohol work. And we said, oh my goodness, we really need to understand the stresses. We need to understand stress's effects on behavior, because if you look for the last 2 overlapping with my professional career, the 3 behaviors that have contributed to chronic diseases are alcohol misuse, nicotine use, smoking, and comfort foods. And those 3 things and their effects on several and a lot of chronic illnesses, brain-related chronic illnesses, as well as physiologic illnesses, medical illnesses that, in this divided brain-body framework, which doesn't help. But frankly, behavior is a cornerstone shaping sort of risk for disease. And so we started the Stress Center with the idea that we would study stress mechanisms and stress processes and everything that gets impinged upon it. And how does the human individual, the person, sort of cope and manage? What happens to our resilient coping mechanisms? Can we begin to understand it so that not only do we develop treatments for those who are more severely affected, but we can develop prevention early on? Is there a way for us to sort of dovetail this? So you're absolutely right. we could have opened the alcohol center. And in fact, across the country in the US and the world, you have alcohol centers and you have substance use centers. But really what we were talking about is let's take a step back, because people do drink because they're stressed.
Yeah.
They're likely to lose, to get into excess because of their distress. So they might have better self-control if they're not stressed. So the stress thing was just, it was like this big elephant in the room.
Too big to ignore. Yeah.
Too big to ignore, exactly. And, people said all kinds of things to me, like, oh, it's too big. What are you even talking? What does it even mean, stress? And I said, you know what? Ask anybody how they're feeling. They're not going to just say, I'm sad or angry. The first word that comes out of their mouth is, I'm stressed. So we as humans identified that way, and it's up to us to really understand that.
Great. And the bit I love about that as well is just the messaging, because, everyone identifies with I have stress.
Right.
And I think in today's day and age, we need messaging that doesn't disassociate. And the messaging being, AA or powerless or any of those, or equally you have a problem or things like that, where most people say, well, I'm not like that, so I don't need to do anything about my relationship with alcohol. I can carry on the way I am. And when you say, well, do you realize that alcohol is the most predominantly used solution for stress, and that actually we need to find better coping mechanism for stress? Everyone can say, well, yeah, I feel like that on a Friday, almost every Friday, that I need something, if not multiple days in the week. Let's pause just for a brief moment. I just want to share with you some of the heartfelt feedback from our incredible Complete Control community members. Listen to this.
I don't know how I signed up. I think I just got an ad on Instagram and just got a whim, just hit the button and did a call and then signed up and didn't really consciously think much about it. And then after that, I was like, what did I just sign up for? Wait a second here. Like, far exceeded my expectations. I'm usually extremely skeptical, so I don't know how I even signed up in the first place, but whatever it was. So it's just amazing how, like, the transformation that I've seen, and even the drinking part is just kind of it was the Achilles heel, but it's kind of just the superficial problem. And it's like, once I kind of clear that up, there's so much more possibility. And the exploration discussions with Gary, with Candace have just been so powerful, and they both kind of focus on a different area. And then with Glenn kind of looking at my data, and with my cohorts or classmates, or, it's just been everything has just been so powerful and kind of supportive of, completing the whole picture of how I do this. So just really grateful and yeah. And also just feel more grateful, and not only just for all of you, but just in life in general. It's just a little bit more clarity and peace and calm and so forth. So
I am incredibly grateful for this entire program, everybody on this call, and everything that we were able to experience. I think that it delivered more than I expected. Honestly, I like I've said before, I've done a couple of challenges and different things. And I think that this, beyond examining my relationship with alcohol and making, I think, pretty good strides in staying alcohol free, I think it taught me a ton about myself and how to examine my habits and my thoughts and those kind of patterns and ways to approach the things that worried me the most in this experience have just been invaluable. I think I'm leaving feeling stronger in general, more self-aware in general, and just really more anchored in who I want to be and what my values are and how I can, take better steps to achieve those. So it's been fantastic for me. And again, our team, I really appreciate all the feedback and support from every single person on this call, but my cohort as well. It's been great.
So I love everybody that I've met here. I have loved the program. I am not an emotional person like this, but this has changed my life. It has given me a life. And there's other things I need to do too. But I don't have to do cloud call anymore. So thank you.
It's been an amazing journey, and I appreciate the professionalism. Whenever I feel the stress, there's something that I can go back to everybody, and the sharing from everybody, and the professionalism of the program. So I loved it, and I've grown a lot. So, ups and kisses.
One word is transformational. That's a word that's been bandied about for decades, but in this, it is absolutely accurate. If I was to use one word, this was a great investment. It's not self-help, it's self-realization. It's super powerful, but it exceeded my expectations. Or maybe it was Sharon who said that. Or maybe I'm exceeding my expectations, and I like that.
The program has been hugely grateful for the program. I think the journey for myself has been amazing. I mean, I remember telling, I don't know if it was Candace or Gary, the first 3 or 4 weeks of the program, I was like, I can't stop thinking about not drinking. It's in my head. Every day I'm thinking about not drinking. And it's like now I'm not even thinking about it. You know, it's just like my life has sort of stepped on. I'm excited about the future. Things are looking good.
I just love sharing the things people are saying about our complete control program. Okay, let's get back into the episode. Now, there's something else very powerful about stress. So I'd like to talk just a bit more from a sort of scientific basis of helping people understand this response to stress and what's happening in the brain and what happens to the body. So maybe you can cover that. But also I'd love to, and I seem to ask 2 questions in one go, so apologies, could be the ADHD, but is that we really understand that trauma, past experiences and things like that is something that significantly contributes to stress. And I think people very much put those two in totally different things. I can hear people often saying to me, oh, absolutely, I've built a very successful business. I've got lots of stress. No, I don't have any trauma. I had a perfectly good upbringing. And I think they misunderstand the collection of the two. So can you start off by giving me a bit of insight into what's actually happening in a brain perspective in our bodies about why we're using alcohol as a coping mechanism for stress?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, stress is kind of complicated because it is, we like to say it's actually an organ system. It's a whole biology that's wired to help us cope and adapt and survive in the world. And actually, I like to say survive and thrive and flourish, because there's a very nice, positive protective side to the whole system. So I start there because we've really grappled with what it is, how does this actually get started? So you see somebody coming, an animal. How does it get started? Or somebody's pointing a gun at you. What happens to you? And people generally start that. It's a highly acute stress response, right? Or you're in a work situation and there's a deadline that was 2 p.m. and it just got moved up to noon. What happened? Well, just notice, do the exercise with me. Just notice what happens to your body. It's not a sequential thing like, oh dear, I got stressed. Oh, let's see. Now my heart is beating. Oh, wait. Now I'm thinking, what should I do? That would not be a very efficient way for a system to work. So one big change that science has led to is that this is actually what I call parallel distributed processing. It's a multi-level, immediate, all systems go kind of alarm system that goes up, right? So you see something, our sensory systems are very good at processing this. Immediately, you've got the signal to your heart and to your stomach, and this is where variation happens. You might be a heart kind of guy, I might be a stomach kind of person, so my stomach clenches up, somebody else gets pain right away in their neck. And so you start to have this alarm system going off. And that same thing happens in the brain. So there's a parallel process in the brain that alerts our emotional systems. It alerts our behavioral systems, like do something, let's save yourself. So yes, that's your fight or flight, but there's so much more that humans do. In fact, fight or flight has not helped us because it's as if, oh, pack that up. That's all. You either run and you And that's all you did. And the rest of it is your cognition and you're so smart and you figure everything out. Well, not really, because we have a system to notice our emotions, to say, oh, well, wait a minute, this person seems pretty upset. If you just take a moment, you might notice a few more features of that. There's not really a danger here, or there is a danger, whatever assessment you're doing. But you have to give your brain some time. So anyway, there's a parallel process going on. And if we react quickly, one downside of this whole thing, and you've heard about habit or you've heard about routines, this brain of ours is a very efficient system. So if you don't have to wait, you're just going to go for something. You just go for it. Attention is a precious resource. We can't allocate it so easily. In fact, most things, I say this to people, that 90% of things that we do as humans, and this is a surprise for folks, happens without our full awareness. We just do them because we've got a computer up here and it sort of processes things. And of course, it's going to go based on learning. So if your learning was, hey, you know what? After tough work day, we're all going to go to the bar because we all relax. You're just going to go ahead and do it, right? If something blocks it, like you can't go there, you start to have what we call wanting or craving. This is something that we learned in our experiments. And then you change your life around to make sure you're always around the things that are going to help you relax in the moment. And then there is, of course, life goes on past that moment. And then there are these additional effects of losing control over drinking or whatever behaviors we do. Now, there are other positive behaviors you could be doing, and people do, in fact, right? You pick up the phone and call somebody. You might go for a run. You might realize it's your dancing group night, and you go out, for your dance. And people have said all of this. You talk about coping, and people come up with the most creative and fantastic things. But you know what? When as you said, there's a pattern of a Friday night or a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. One of the things people also discuss is, I used to go to a music session, a jamming session on a Thursday night or Friday, and I gave that up because I started going to the bar instead.
Yeah. So
it starts to replace natural, pleasurable things in this sort of very quick, responsive way of like, oh, I'm going to just take care of it in this way.
Without the solution.
It's a faster solution, right? So you could say to me, well, what can we do about that? Well, start by just taking a moment. I mean, it sounds so ridiculous, right? Like slow down. But actually, how hard is it to slow down?
We call it surf the urge.
Surfing the urge is exactly right. We call it that as well.
Yeah.
Surf the urge. Notice it, but don't act. Not acting is very hard to do, right? And then making a choice towards what action you're going to go to, which is similar to your point about surfing the urge, noticing it, and then bringing back decision of action to the person.
Yeah. You said, you were sort of taking us through this building over time. So perhaps you could go into a bit more detail about, using this tool in the beginning and starting to develop this relationship where it quickly helps you unwind. What is happening in that process in the brain? What's happening in our body? What's happening to us as we go through that place where it now becomes the predominant solution used perhaps, every single weekend, 3 times a week, maybe daily, just to take that edge off to everything. So take me through that journey.
Yeah, no, that's great. What I said earlier was a lot of the psychological side of it. But there's a big biology that is going on. And let's go back to alcohol as a stimulant. And arousing, turning up your heart rate. Well, the natural stress response, coming back to why we have the stress. What is the natural stress response? I just talked about the fact that the stress system, the stress biology is there to help us cope. Well, it sounds a little weird because people have said to me, if I didn't have this emotion stuff and stress stuff, I'd do just fine. I'd be able to think. I'm like, be careful what you wish for. Imagine not knowing the alerting and the alarm, what's going on for a moment. So one thing that we've realized is that having a stress response is actually a good thing in the short term. So this is another thing that is a nugget of science. People used to say, if I could just take away that stress response, blunt it, it would be fine. Well, yeah, alcohol would do that. And we were fine with that for a long time. So what do you need for the stress response? You want a nice baseline, you want a nice response, and you want to come back down to base. That's your nice inverted U curve about. And when you go up, you actually have signals going to even your cognitive systems to sort of be thinking about things. But a lot of times we abort that and we react. We go ahead and have 1 or 2 drinks, right? So what happens with alcohol? You have 1, 2, 3, 4. That baseline starts to shift. And the up response, that starts to go down. And you start to have a dysregulation in our heart rate, in our blood pressure. Just think about, you don't even have to go to any cell. There's lots of cellular changes. We won't even have to talk about that. You feel your heart rate, well, that changed. Now, beat by beat, we've done studies where if you've had a night of drinking, maybe a misuse or excess in a sort of a binge night, your basal heart rate has shifted. This response, the ability to then react to a stressful situation has shifted. You no longer have a nice, robust response. And then the recovery has shifted. So it doesn't come back down to baseline. So that is the physiology that gets affected directly. So then you might say, oh, well, that's just a consequence. In a few days, I'll be fine. And maybe that has nothing to do with my drive to drink and that urge that you were talking about. Well, those are things we found that actually does have a drive to drink. And why does it have that? Think about this. If we have a wired stress biology system to help us adapt, the body is wired to protect that system, protect it at all costs. All costs. And that's a physiologic cellular thing. We got to just face it. This is not something you can change. There was the old model that you drink because you're weak. And if you're stoic, that's all nonsense. Nonsense, right? The body physiology is wired to adapt. So what is it going to do? When the shift starts to happen, it's going to want to push us towards more alcohol. Why? Because alcohol actually does sort of try to reset the system. It's a way of stimulating the system. So it's a way of stimulating that rise response. Of course, it doesn't happen. So you get into this cycle. We call it, and this is another thing in our models, in our framework, it's feed forward.
Yeah.
Well, you get stuck in this feed forward response where the more you drink, the more dysregulation of your stress response. But if there's a dysregulation of your stress response, you're going to be driven to try to fix it. And so you're battling in this feed forward response. Breaking out of that becomes hard.
Okay, we can come back onto that. Breaking out of it is hard, but this feed forward, fascinating in your research there about this feed forward. That part, which I think a lot of people will recognize, is just spelling this back out again. What you're saying is that ultimately alcohol or regular alcohol consumption, or heavy alcohol consumption over time, is debilitating or diminishing your ability to deal with stress. And in order to not only resolve the stress that you have, do you need to drink, but it's also diminishing that ability in the first hand. So it's this whole kind of poisonous cycle feeding itself. You also mentioned, and I'm going to just mention this now, this is your piece about alcohol's negative emotional side, the role of stress, neurobiology, and alcohol use disorder. And you also mention, which is really fascinating, but you also mention in there that cortisol, which we touched on earlier, but is the fight or flight. Are you going to come up with a new term for this fight or flight thing that encompasses more of a system? Because that's what everyone uses out there. So a new word for this fight or flight system, but it actually increases cortisol in the moment, releases cortisol in the moment, but it increases cortisol production over time. But what you found was that people were becoming in desire of more cortisol. So they were becoming, drinking alcohol to get more cortisol. Is that what I understood from there?
So let me clarify. The thing about, we want simple systems. We want it to go up or down. And our stress system is set up to actually have a cycle. We have something with cortisol called the diurnal rhythm, right? Which basically means that there's this cycle, 24-hour cycle of cortisol going up and down. And that rhythm, it ties into our sleep, it ties into our stress response, it ties into our behavior. What happens with alcohol is that it releases cortisol. There are signals to increase and release cortisol from the adrenals. But the controls that are there start to lose functioning. So you can have increases in cortisol. And by the way, the heart rate, the autonomic signal also goes for increasing cortisol production. So you've got alcohol stimulating both of these things. Cortisol production goes up. But what I mean by the control of regulating this cortisol dying, the direct effect of that is that you don't get a rise in cortisol if you're facing stress. You get a blunted response.
Yeah.
And that, we call that a phasic response or an acute response to stress, is then dysfunctional or disrupted. So yes, you have higher overall production, but you have this diurnal rhythm kind of going out of whack. You have disruption in that, and you can't get a good stress response, both in terms of your heart rate, but also in terms of cortisol. And so that is the drive. That is the life signal, the biological signal. Because imagine that rise has a lot to do with keeping us safe and keeping us alive. And so the body's wired to actually try to push that. And one way, because alcohol is a stimulant, it does produce cortisol. One way to do that is like wanting to drink more.
Have another drink, have another drink.
Just have another drink because it's actually going to push. But what it's doing is it's pushing keeps pushing the baseline up, and it's not really. So it's a disruption. It's a physiologic change that has occurred in that phasic response. And we're interested in figuring out, well, how long does that take to recover?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
What's the answer?
The answer is, we have to, we don't have a clear answer. It seems like it may be 3 months, 3 to 4 months, but you really have to cut down on the stimulant that is, in fact, keeping it depressed. So we don't have a clear answer, and we're thinking that there might be. Now, the reason why we don't have a clear answer is, remember, this stress biology is wired to adapt, and all of us are on different time scales in terms of how we adapt. So even the recovery side varies. The effects side varies, and the recovery side varies. Some people, the effects come earlier based on your genes and your exposure to trauma and your exposure to other things. How many hits your stress biology has taken. But for others, it might be a little slower. And so that gets us in trouble as scientists in sort of figuring out. But what it does do is say each person is individual. So what we need are ways to really assess each person and see how, what's been the impact on them and what is going to be their trajectory for preventing a harder course or recovery from several binge episodes, and what does it take to bring back this biology to normalcy?
Well, hopefully technology can play a role there.
Technology,
continuous monitoring of cortisol levels, self-reported or understanding from stress, right? Is there other ways you measure stress? It's probably quite a big word for a few things happening in your brain and body, but yeah.
Yeah, no. So we've actually been quite focused on that, and the physiology and there's some great tools, devices that do help us assess that. The other thing is that the body and the mind tell us. So we have something called the stress symptoms. Now, you don't hear that phrase a whole lot, but there are stress symptoms across different domains of expression that come up. And this is important because, again, like I said at the beginning, you may be somebody that feels a lot of it in their heart. I may be somebody that feels it in my stomach.
Yeah.
So there are different domains in which the stress alarm system also tells us. So in addition to the physiology, we like to assess people's stress symptoms. You know, they're having sleep problems, they have pain, they're having attentional things. They start to notice that they're getting emotionally reactive. Their wife said, "You're not present anymore." Paying attention to some of these things starts to tell us, oh, you know what? It's having an effect on you.
Yeah.
And it's time to pay attention to it to sort of see if we can reverse course.
Yeah. Is there any other? I've just recently, don't know if you know the Aura Ring, but they recently published the stress.
Yep.
Apparently, I'm not very stressed, which is not true. I'm questioning that. But I think that sort of technology is going to get better and better and better and better. You know, I'm very excited about it. We use the Aura Ring in our program. We use it to help people stress, but we also use another heart rate variability monitor to help people see their stress, see whether they're in sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous systems. So, what could actionably people do here around stress? What have you discovered that helps people with stress?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we've had sort of a two-pronged approach, because if things have gone too far for somebody, they may be able to do it on their own. They may reverse course, but they may need a little help in the beginning. And this help could be with talking to someone, a professional, or even a medication. And here I don't mean something like a benzodiazepine, because those have their own challenges. But really, there is we are doing a lot of the work of sort of trying to see, can we have something that could help people reset, something that's safe, but reset some of this disruption. And there are some very good targets that we are studying and coming up. So there's that side.
Are any of them psychedelics?
You know, we are doing a little bit of work with psychedelics. There's a lot more going on here at Yale. But I haven't personally done a whole lot of work. I'm hearing it, I'm taking it in, and there's some very interesting, intriguing findings about psychedelics. But these are some other natural chemicals that the body endogenously produces that get suppressed by alcohol or by other, by trauma and by high levels of any other drugs. And so we are sort of thinking about, how do you retune these natural protective pathways to start functioning again. And that's one of our approaches.
Is there any other chemicals you could mention, or any practice or anything that somebody can use to?
Right. So in terms of behaviorally, I think slowing down, noticing more. You know where I'm going with this, because the moment you think about noticing more, there's the movement of mindfulness that has been there across the world. Mindfulness sounds easy. It's like, hey, just stop for a moment, pay attention. And, you know, that's good. That's a great place to start. But then what you have to do is notice what happens to your attention. Your attention goes here, it goes there. Keeping your attention focused on one thing is hard. Taking your attention to your breath, which is part of mindfulness, helps kind of stabilize that. Counting your breath helps stabilize that. And as soon as you start to do that, you start to see your brain slow down. You're giving the natural multi-level system stress response some space to do its job, basically. So think about it in those terms. Counting, as I said, slowing down, not acting, saying, okay, I'm going to act 10 minutes from now. I'm just going to stay. Here's the phrase that I like to use. Where's the fire? If there's a fire, run. Absolutely. But so much of our stress does not have a fire right there. What does that mean? That means take a moment. It means put away your devices, get away from everything. Be the friend of your body and your mind. partner with your body and mind, and you will see your device that's monitoring heart rate variability show you that there's a change. If you're monitoring your breathing, you'll see that it's starting to change. If you just don't act, you'll say, you know what? Maybe I didn't need to think of, I first thought I'd do that, but actually I'm going to wait. I'm going to do this other course of action. Suddenly your brain starts to function. So that's one thing. And biologically, there are chemicals that kind of help push this, can help slow it, help us regulate. And that's something, like I said, we're also exploring and testing natural steroids in the body that help regulate the cortisol complex, and several other steroids is one aspect of what we are testing. Another set of medicines or things that we're thinking about are things that help us not get as overwhelmed in our prefrontal cortex, which is this frontal region of the brain that helps us think and slow things down and decide things in a better way. So how can we keep that online longer so that we give our brains some help in the moment to make good decisions?
Yeah. There's lots that's come into my mind here, and I think, if you could wave a magic wand, because for people, the pressure is put on in the world around us to perform and in meetings and the requirements that we have to do for these jobs. And I'm thinking about a wonderful woman who signed up last week and works at one of the largest health organizations in the world. And she was talking about enormous amounts of pressure and her role. It's almost like if you imagine the grip, okay? And the grip is as you strengthen this grip and hold on to it, tighten your fist and tighten your fist and tighten your fist, you can feel that grip tighten, you can feel that grip tighten. And if you keep doing it, you end up with cramp and pains in your arm, right? The soreness. And that's like that chronic bit. It's like you haven't released this tension here, and the tension builds and builds and builds and builds. And we can go back onto this, but I think that it happens faster with ADHD and neurodivergence. And we haven't touched on that, but we will. But I think ADHD, neurodivergent people, they seem to get more hyperactive faster. That's that hyperactive part. So therefore, the grip comes on quicker, the cramp comes on, and it's even harder for them to just let go. And really what we're trying to say is just let go for a second. It's a second. It's just a little bit. It's a few breaths in between those Zoom meetings. It is coming out of the boardroom and choosing to walk once around the block rather than having a coffee, right? It's just these little practice which calm down that central nervous system, which is going to have a significant impact at the end of the day when you're like, oh my God, I need a drink at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah?
Exactly. Yeah, I think taking the time, taking a few moments. The other piece that I would add to that is doing one thing at a time. So people say, we in society today, multitasking is sort of a credential. Hey, I'm a great multitasker. You look at the business world, it's like, if you're not a multitasker. So what does that even mean? I like to talk about this as a ball. Your brain is a ball. If you divide attention into two tasks in that moment, just in that moment, now that one task got only half your brain. Now you divide it into four. Now that one task got only a quarter of your brain. So the function is going to be affected in the same way. Now we've got built-in capacity, and that's why humans can do this. We've got some capacity there. We can do a more mundane task while we're doing something else that is happening. But imagine you are using less brain cells. This is all about brain cells. It's not out in the ether. So less brain cells are being allocated to each thing. So even if I've done some consultation with cancer docs, for example. They're like, I don't have any time. We have absolutely no time. And so just like you said, the 1 second, the 2 seconds, take 10 seconds, take a minute, but do just that one thing. Do just breathing. Turn off the other stuff. Turn off, these phones, being connected, or the hyper-connected society, we have to sort of be looking at it and be breathing. No. Take the 30 seconds, divide up your 3 minutes. Instead of doing 4 things all in the 3 minutes, take 1 minute for one, 1 minute for the other. So it sounds weird, and it's hard for our brains to do that. But again, it's a way of sort of slowing down. And just as you said, between meetings, taking a walk, closing your eyes, shutting down on sensory pieces, to start to be the friend of your brain and your body.
Love it. It's very powerful, actionable stuff to do. Yeah, we didn't touch too much on that trauma. I just want to dive into trauma. How much does that play? What impact does this childhood trauma or later trauma, or impact does this trauma have on our stress response? And, again, are you seeing ways to recover from that in the stress?
Yes. Well, the first thing is that trauma is one of the highest overwhelming events that for this biology that I talked about, with the brain, mind, and body. And so, again, it's going to feel totally challenged, overwhelmed. Anything unpredictable, anything repeated will continue to affect it and start to dysregulate it over time. So, trauma feeds right into making us vulnerable to more stress, getting stuck in this sort of tight, pace and feed forward kind of responsivity that you were describing so well. And also it puts us at risk for being into the feed forward alcohol use cycle. Now, that has been shown. And so recovery from trauma needs its own attention. Paying attention to trauma, making meaning of horrific events is not easy. And our brains, we haven't talked about this, but our brains are driven by wanting to make meaning. That's a very important aspect of it. And when you have horrific things, they make no sense. And so things stay disrupted in our bodies, and it can last for a while. And then the choices we make can sort of make it sometimes worse. But we can also make choices that don't feel like they would help, but in the long run, they do start to help. Just taking care of your body, just taking care of you, validating yourself, talking to people who would validate yourself, your experience, starting to notice what has happened to your body, and then getting the support, the help, whatever is needed, owning the trauma. We run from the trauma because it makes no sense. That's a natural response, and yet it's not necessarily, it's what we had to do in the moment. We had to distance ourselves from it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a natural coping response. You got to distance from whatever it is that absolutely overwhelmed us and took us by storm and made no sense, the horrific acts of trauma. But now we still have to come back and live in the next moment, right?
Yeah.
And so that is the recovering or regrouping, the rescuing of our body and brains that needs to happen. It needs its due. It needs its due, and we need to take the time to do that.
What I find, all of this has been incredibly fascinating, but I think what I find so genuinely powerful here is in amongst this message, right? You started researching alcohol and drug addiction and things like that, and throughout this conversation, we haven't really talked about abstinence or not abstinence or having to stop drinking, which I think is a lot of the rhetoric is out there. Instead, what we've been talking about is you probably have a lot of stress in your life and ways and tools to reduce and mitigate. And even the thing I say to people is what you've given here is not a way for somebody to get rid of stress. It's a way for them to handle stress better, right?
That's right.
So it's a way for them to perform better in their role, to handle a greater level of stress.
Right.
And on top of that, you're talking about how alcohol has diminished their ability to deal with stress over time. So it's robbing that thing from them. And then we've kind of touched on trauma, past experiences, and saying, look, this is stuff that you need to go and sort out. Now, that's not a 5-minute thing, but it's a wonderful journey doing that. All of this is incredibly important. The way we've phrased it on here, how I believe, is because this is exactly how our program is designed to help people go through. I'd say those are the two fundamental things. But the underlying part of what we're doing is to say to people, look, this is a journey, right? This is a journey. At the moment, right now, you're drinking this much, and you want to be drinking this much. And these are the things that you're going to need to do in order to do that. And in that journey, it's more like this. You're going to grow and become a better human. You're going to be able to deal with more stress. You're going to let go of your past trauma and childhood crap that's dragging you around. And then in doing that, you're going to be able to be in a place where you can drink less alcohol. That's so much more tangible, I think, for the vast majority of people.
Absolutely. Meet yourself where you are. Be kind to yourself, and then one day at a time. Make your goals, and be kind and compassionate to yourself, because that will help you be the same to others. But really take on what you want to do, reset each day. Each day is a new day, and really do that process. And I love the way you did that. The seesaw, that you can flip this and actually get stronger day by day in that process.
Yeah, it's amazing. Great. Well, you are doing absolutely amazing things out there in the world. I'm so glad to have any small part of sharing the work that you are doing with the world. So, Rajita, where do people find more about you?
Well, we have a website, the Yale Stress Center. And I am actually working on a book, which is on stress and the stressed brain, and what it does and how it helps us, fight or flight, but really much more than that. Learn, adapt, and thrive is one of the things that we really need to harness, and that's what this book is about. And hopefully, folks will find that pretty soon. By next year. It's sort of in the works. It's happening. And yes, it's very exciting. And we are, putting out papers. We're happy to talk to more folks. I'm involved heavily in the Research Society on Alcohol, which is an international society that is very much focused on getting the latest science out to the public, to other scientists, but also to the public. And we are refocusing our efforts, wanting to talk to the community, provide information and awareness. And so those are some ways in which, we're hoping to increase the information channel out there on these topics.
Amazing. Well, we'll make sure all of those are in the show notes and that you can find out more. And we will definitely get you back on the podcast when the book comes out. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the wonderful work you're doing, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon, Rajita. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure being here. Good luck to you. Take care.
Thank you.